Every gardener knows the disappointment. You plant for spring, it blooms spectacularly, and by July, the show is over. You plant for summer, and by September, there is nothing left. The garden has seasons of beauty and long stretches of green in between that feel like waiting. But there is a group of perennials that gardeners with the most beautiful and the most continuously colorful gardens know about, and most casual gardeners have never encountered. Plants that simply do not stop. Not because they are pushed or forced or deadheaded into submission, but because their natural growth habit produces flowers in such continuous and such overlapping succession that the bloom season stretches from late spring all the way to hard frost without a single week of bare stems or empty color. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are revealing the secret to perpetual blooms, counting down 10 rare perennials that never stop flowering. Plants that are not commonly found at the average garden center, that require a little more intention to source, and that reward that extra effort with the kind of garden that makes visitors stop, look, and ask what on earth you planted to make it look like that from June through October. Let us get into it. Quick pause before we begin. If you are new here, welcome. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a video. And if our content has ever introduced you to a plant you had never heard of that became one of your absolute favorites, a thumbs up right now means everything to this channel. It helps us reach more gardeners who are ready to move beyond the ordinary and discover what the best gardens are actually planted with. We appreciate every single one of you. Now let us count down all 10. The reason most perennial gardens have gaps in their bloom calendar is not that continuous bloom is impossible. It is that the plants capable of delivering it are rarely the ones displayed most prominently at the average garden center. Standard retail selections favor plants with spectacular but brief peak performance over plants with sustained season-long flowering because brief peak performance photographs well on a label. The plants on today's list do not have that problem. Their value is not a single spectacular week. It is 20 consecutive weeks of genuine, never-stopping bloom. Every perennial on today's list was chosen against a single standard. It must produce fresh flowers in continuous or near-continuous succession from early summer through to the first killing frost, without requiring intensive deadheading or repeated intervention to maintain that performance. These are rare in the sense that you will rarely see them at a chain garden center. Not rare in the sense of being difficult to grow. Most of them are among the easiest perennials available. They are simply not well known enough yet. Let us change that. Plant number 1. Geranium roseanne, Geranium X hybridum roseanne. Opening our rare perpetual blooming perennial list at number 1 is the plant that has done more to redefine what continuous flowering means in the perennial border than any other single introduction of the past 30 years. Geranium roseanne. From late spring through the first hard frost, and in mild seasons pushing well beyond it, roseanne produces a near-continuous carpet of violet-blue flowers with white centers above deeply cut, attractively marbled foliage that spreads and fills border space with a flowing, self-directing generosity that makes every garden it appears in look more considered, more designed, and more effortlessly beautiful than the same garden planted without it. It was awarded the title of most popular perennial in the world by the Royal Horticultural Society, a distinction earned entirely through the universal experience of gardeners who grow it and refuse to garden without it thereafter. The perpetual flowering mechanism of roseanne is fundamentally different from the multi-flush perennials that require cutbacks to trigger rebloom. Roseanne does not flush and rest. It simply produces flowers continuously in a steady, unhurried, unstoppable succession. That means there is never a moment, from late May through October, when the plant is not in bloom. No deadheading triggers this. No cutback is required to maintain it. The plant is simply, constitutionally, built to bloom continuously from the first warm weeks of the season to the last. That quality is rarer than it appears and more valuable than most gardeners who have not yet grown Roseanne realize. The key benefit: the most continuously flowering, the most universally admired, and the most genuinely effortless perpetual bloomer on today's list. Roseanne delivers violet blue from late spring to frost without a single week of empty stems, without deadheading, and without any management beyond the space to spread and the sun or partial shade to grow in. The caution: Roseanne spreads vigorously as the season advances, extending its stems over and through neighboring plants in a way that is charming when managed and problematic when not. Give it generous space from the outset, anticipate the spread in the planting design, and trim back stems that are overwhelming smaller neighbors. In a well-planned border where its spreading habit is accommodated, it is genuinely one of the most rewarding perennials available at any price or any rarity level. Plant number 2, Veronicastrum virginicum. Culver's root. Number 2 is the rare perennial that provides one of the most architecturally commanding, the most structurally distinctive, and the most continuously produced tall vertical bloom elements of any plant available for the back of the summer border. Veronicastrum virginicum, Culver's root. Those extraordinarily elegant candelabra arrangements of slender, tapering flower spikes in soft white, pale lavender, or soft pink, held horizontally from whorled stems that rise to 5 or 6 feet above whorled tiers of lance-shaped leaves, create a vertical border presence of such refined sophistication and such genuine botanical distinction that every professional garden designer who discovers this plant uses it repeatedly and consistently in every border scheme where height and continuous summer color are simultaneously required. The continuously blooming quality of Veronicastrum is rooted in the sequential opening of its flower spikes from the bottom upward, a process so gradual and so sustained that a single established plant appears to be in continuous bloom for 8 to 10 weeks at a time, rather than reaching a single peak and declining. As the lower spikes complete their bloom cycle and begin to develop their architecturally interesting seed structure, fresh spikes are still opening above them, creating a plant that presents bloom, developing seed, and fresh flower simultaneously on different parts of the same stem. The overall visual effect, particularly in the white variety album, is of a plant perpetually in the process of becoming more beautiful, rather than one that has already peaked and is in decline. The key benefit: the most architecturally commanding, the most sequentially blooming, and the most border height defining rare perennial on today's list. Veronicastrum virginicum brings a quality of botanical sophistication and structural elegance to the back of the summer border that no more commonly available tall perennial replicates. The caution: Veronicastrum prefers consistently moist soil and performs less well in dry conditions than most other plants on today's list. In reliably moist borders, or in garden positions with dependable summer rainfall, it thrives and self-supports beautifully. In drier conditions, amend the soil with generous organic matter to improve moisture retention and stake the tallest stems in exposed positions where summer wind could compromise the architectural quality of the candelabra form that makes this plant so extraordinary. Plant number 3, Penstemon digitalis Husker. Red number 3 is the rare perennial that earns its perpetual blooming credentials, not through a single unbroken flowering period, but through the combination of the most extended individual bloom season of any tubular flowered perennial available, and one of the most ornamentally valuable year-round foliage contributions in the border. Penstemon digitalis Husker Red. Those elegant spikes of tubular, two-lipped white flowers with their faint blush pink interior flushing rise above the most extraordinary foliage in the penstemon family, deep burgundy bronze stems and leaves that are as richly colored and as design valuable as the flowers themselves, creating a plant that earns its border space through three simultaneous contributions in a way that few other perennials manage. The bloom season of Husker Red, beginning in late spring and extending through summer with prompt deadheading of spent spikes, is among the most extended of any upright border perennial. Each deadheaded stem triggers the production of new lateral bloom spikes that continue the flower display week after week through July and August in a succession that, on a well-established, well-managed plant, creates the impression of perpetual blooming across a season of 4 to 5 months. The deep burgundy foliage that continues to provide rich, jewel-dark color between and beneath the flower spikes through the entire season means that the plant looks genuinely designed and deliberately chosen at every stage of its growth cycle, not just during its peak bloom weeks. The key benefit: the most foliage plus flower valuable, the most hummingbird attracting, and the most design sophisticated extended bloom rare perennial on today's list. Husker Red earns its border space through the rarest combination available in a perennial, extraordinary foliage color, and extraordinary flower quality, delivered simultaneously through the same extended bloom season. The caution: excellent drainage is the single most critical requirement for penstemon longevity in the border. In heavy, wet, or poorly drained soil, penstemon declines regardless of how well every other aspect of its care is managed. In well-drained, moderately fertile soil with full sun to light shade, it establishes readily, self-sows modestly to maintain a population in the border, and performs with a reliability and a beauty that makes it one of the most consistently rewarding rare perennial investments available. Plant number 4, Canautia macedonica, crimson pincushion. Number 4 is the rare perennial that delivers the most unexpectedly continuous, the most elegantly individual, and the most jewel-colored perpetual bloom of any plant on today's list through the simplest and most self-directing mechanism available in the perennial world: self-sowing continuous replacement. Canautia macedonica, crimson pincushion. From early summer through the first hard frost, Canautia produces a near-continuous succession of those perfectly formed, deep crimson to burgundy wine pincushion flower heads on wiry, branching stems that rise above a low mound of gray-green foliage in a display that is simultaneously refined and abundant, individually charming and collectively striking. The plant produces and replaces flower heads with such speed and such reliability that there is never a moment through the long blooming season when the plant appears finished or even approaching the end of its performance. The self-sowing habit of Canautia is the mechanism that transforms it from a merely long-blooming perennial into a genuinely perpetual, flowering presence in the garden. Each plant produces seed prolifically, and those seeds germinate freely in the surrounding soil, establishing new plants that begin flowering within weeks of germination in warm conditions and continue the bloom display even as parent plants are reaching the end of their individual season. The result, in a garden where Canautia has been established for 2 or more seasons, is a self-perpetuating, self-distributing population of continuously flowering plants that fills the border with those jewel crimson pincushions through every week from early June to late October, without any replanting, any intervention, and any of the management that more demanding perennials require to maintain their performance. The key benefit: the most jewel crimson, the most self-perpetuating, and the most genuinely effort-free, perpetually flowering rare perennial on today's list. Canautia maintains its own continuous flowering population through self-sowing, making it the perennial that most completely and most independently sustains its own perpetual bloom display without any assistance from the gardener. The caution. The prolific self-seeding that makes Nadia so valuable as a self-perpetuating continuous bloomer also means that seedling management is an annual task in smaller, more formally maintained gardens. Remove unwanted seedlings when they are small and easy to pull. In naturalistic, meadow-style, or informally maintained borders, allow the colony to distribute freely, and the self-seeding habit becomes one of the most valuable and most labor-saving qualities in the planting. Plant number 5. Scabiosa columbaria, butterfly blue. Pincushion, flower. Number 5 is the rare perennial that has been producing its near-continuous succession of lavender blue pincushion flower heads from early summer through frost for decades in trial gardens and private borders around the world, winning more perennial plant awards and more repeat gardener purchases than almost any other continuously flowering perennial of comparable rarity. Scabiosa columbaria, butterfly blue. Those distinctive dome-shaped flower heads in the clearest, most saturated soft lavender blue, each one a perfectly structured arrangement of small florets held on long, slender, wiry stems above a low mound of gray-green foliage, are produced in a succession so continuous and so reliably self-renewing that the plant appears to be perpetually at peak performance, rather than cycling through the flower and rest pattern that characterizes most perennials. The perpetual blooming mechanism of butterfly blue is rooted in its extraordinarily prolific stem production. Where most perennials produce a defined number of bloom stems per season, determined by their crown size and their stored energy reserves, butterfly blue produces new bloom stems continuously from the crown throughout the entire growing season, replacing spent stems with fresh ones in a cycle so rapid and so constant that the overall display never reaches a point where the plant looks finished or diminished. This stem production rate, combined with the moderate size and the delicate elegance of each individual flower head, creates a container or border plant that always looks active, always looks productive, and always looks genuinely beautiful, regardless of which week of the season you are standing in front of it. The key benefit: the most award-winning, the most continuously stem-producing, and the most reliably perpetual lavender blue small flower bloomer on today's list. Butterfly blue delivers genuine, never-stopping, soft lavender blue from early summer to frost in a package so reliably beautiful and so consistently proven across decades of garden performance that it represents one of the safest and most rewarding investments in the rare, perpetual blooming perennial category. The caution: regular deadheading, removing spent flower stems down to the next lateral bud, maintains the most rapid and the most continuous stem replacement cycle. Without deadheading, the plant continues to bloom, but at a reduced rate as energy is directed towards seed production. Full sun and well-drained, moderately fertile soil produce the most vigorous stem output and the most reliably perpetual display through the entire season. Plant number 6. Persicaria amplexicaulis. Mountain fleece number 6 is the rare perennial that surprises almost every gardener who encounters it for the first time and becomes indispensable to every gardener who grows it, delivering a perpetual blooming performance in the second half of the season that no other large border perennial matches for sustained continuity, for vivid color, or for the sheer quantity of fine-textured flower spikes produced per week across an extended late summer and fall bloom season. Persicaria amplexicaulis, mountain fleece. From midsummer through hard frost, and often well beyond it in mild seasons, this vigorous clump-forming perennial produces a near-continuous succession of slender, tapering flower spikes in vivid crimson red, deep magenta, soft pink, or pure white above large, bold, lance-shaped foliage, creating a mid-border presence that gets better, more abundant, and more colorful with every week that advances toward autumn. The perpetual flowering quality of Persicaria amplexicaulis is among the most completely and most consistently demonstrated of any perennial on today's list. Unlike plants that require specific management interventions to maintain their bloom cycle, Persicaria simply continues producing fresh flower spikes regardless of what is done or not done to the surrounding planting. No deadheading required, no cutback needed, no feeding schedule essential. The plant pushes new spikes from the base of the clump continuously through late summer and fall in a performance that intensifies as the season advances, producing its most abundant and most colorful display in September and October, when most other border perennials are winding toward their conclusion. The key benefit: the most vigorous, the most late-season intensifying, and the most genuinely management-free, perpetually flowering rare perennial on today's list. Persicaria amplexicaulis performs with the most consistently impressive and the most unstoppable continuous bloom production of any large border perennial available. And it does this across the widest range of conditions, in sun or shade, moist or moderately dry soil, without asking for anything in return. The caution. Persicaria amplexicaulis is a vigorous plant that forms a large clump over time and needs adequate space from the outset. Allow at least 2 to 3 feet from neighboring perennials for the clump expansion of the first 3 seasons. Divide every 4 to 5 years in early spring to manage the size and to refresh the vigor and the bloom quality. The weed-suppressing density of the established clump is one of its most practically valuable border qualities. Plant number 7, Linaria purpurea, purple toadflax. Number 7 is the rare perennial that fills the garden with the most delicate, the most continuously produced, and the most unexpectedly elegant small-scale vertical bloom of any self-sowing plant on today's list. Linaria purpurea, purple toadflax. From late spring through the first hard frost, Linaria produces those slender, graceful spikes of tiny snapdragon-like flowers in rich purple, soft lavender pink, or pure white on airy, branching stems that rise above glaucous gray-green foliage to fill every gap in the border with a quality of light, continuous, fine-textured vertical color that is completely unlike anything a bulkier or more bold-flowered border plant provides. The effect of Linaria in the garden is the effect of botanical embroidery, small-scale, intricate, endlessly detailed, and always in production. The perpetual blooming performance of Linaria is maintained through the same self-sowing mechanism that sustains Nadia on today's list. A single established Linaria plant self-sows prolifically into the surrounding border, producing a population of plants at different stages of their individual bloom cycles simultaneously, so that as one plant reaches the end of its season, 5 new self-sown seedlings nearby are just beginning theirs. The result is a self-perpetuating, colony-forming, continuously blooming presence in the border that requires no replanting, no division, and no management to maintain its season-long flowering display. In a border where it has been established for 2 seasons, Linaria is simply always in bloom somewhere, filling gaps between more substantial perennials with its airy, continuous, fine-textured vertical color. The key benefit: the most delicately vertical, the most self-perpetuating through self-sowing, and the most gap-filling, continuously blooming rare perennial on today's list. Linaria purpurea fills the spaces between more substantial border plants with a fine-textured, always-in-bloom vertical presence that makes the overall planting look more complex, more layered, and more continuously colorful than it would be without it. The caution. Linaria self-sows very freely and in a small, tightly managed border can produce more seedlings than desired. Deadhead before seeds, set on plants in positions where its spread is not wanted. In naturalistic or cottage-style borders where self-seeding is welcome, allow it to distribute freely. The seedlings are easily identified by their distinctive gray-green foliage and are simple to remove when small if they appear in unwanted positions. Plant number 8, Erigeron carvinskianus, Mexican fleabane. Number 8 is the rare perennial that produces the most charming, the most continuously blushing, and the most architecturally specific perpetual bloom of any self-sowing plant on today's list, colonizing wall crevices, path edges, paving gaps, and stony borders with a succession of tiny daisy flowers that open white, mature through pale pink to deep rose pink as they age, and present all 3 color stages simultaneously on any single plant at any point in the season from late spring through frost. Erigeron carvinskianus, Mexican fleabane. The effect of this color progression across a large established colony of fleabane is one of the most naturally beautiful and most botanically distinctive in the summer garden, creating a softly blushing, multi-toned, continuously renewing display that never looks the same twice, because the proportions of white pale pink and deep pink blooms shift and change as new flowers open and old flowers deepen. The perpetual blooming quality of Mexican fleabane is sustained through the same continuous stem production mechanism that drives butterfly blue, combined with the self-sowing colony maintenance that sustains Nautia and Linaria. Individual plants produce fresh flower stems in rapid, continuous succession from late spring through frost. The self-sowing habit of the species simultaneously maintains and expands the colony, filling new crevices, new path edges, and new paving gaps with fresh plants that carry the blushing daisy display into every available position in the garden's hard landscape. In a garden where fleabane has been established for several seasons, it eventually appears exactly where it is most beautiful, in the wall joints and path cracks, where no deliberate planting could achieve the same naturalistic, settled, always been there quality. The key benefit: the most continuously blushing, the most wall and crevice colonizing, and the most charmingly naturalistic perpetual small daisy on today's list. Erigeron carvinskianus fills the structural gaps of the garden, the mortar joints, the path crevices, the step edges, with an ever-blushing display of tiny daisies that transforms hard garden architecture into something that appears softened by decades of natural growth. The caution: in mild climates and ideal conditions, Erigeron self-sows very prolifically. Unwanted seedlings are easily removed when small. In colder climates, it may not be fully hardy perennial, but self-sows so freely that it persists as a self-replacing annual colony without any intervention. It establishes most readily in lean, gritty, well-drained conditions and performs less well in rich, moist, heavily amended soil. Plant number 9, Sanguisorba officinalis. Great Bernay number 9 is the rare perennial that delivers the most unexpectedly beautiful, the most botanically sophisticated, and the most continuously produced small-headed bloom of any tall border plant on today's list, in a form so distinctive and so immediately recognizable as the signature of a knowledgeable, design-confident garden, that experienced gardeners who encounter it for the first time in a border immediately want to know what it is and where to find it. Sanguisorba officinalis, Great Burnet. Those distinctive small, dark, bottle brush flower heads in deep burgundy red to near black bob on tall, wiry, elegantly branching stems, above deeply divided fresh green foliage from midsummer through frost, in a display that is as unusual and as architecturally refined as any perennial bloom available in the contemporary naturalistic garden palette. The perpetual blooming quality of Sanguisorba is produced through the same sequential, gradual opening mechanism that gives Veronicastrum its extended individual bloom season, but applied across an entire branching stem system that produces dozens of individual flower heads per plant in overlapping succession. As the earliest flower heads complete their display and develop their small, architecturally beautiful seed structures, fresh heads are opening elsewhere on the same branching stem system, maintaining a continuous presence of both fresh bloom and developing structure simultaneously. The movement quality of those nodding heads on their slender, wiry stems in any breeze adds an animation to the border that static, upright-stemmed plants cannot replicate, making Sanguisorba one of the most visually dynamic perpetual bloomers on today's list. The key benefit: the most botanically distinctive, the most movement beautiful, and the most genuinely rare perpetual bloomer on today's list, in the sense that it is least commonly seen and most consistently admired when it is encountered. Sanguisorba officinalis brings a quality of design sophistication and naturalistic authority to the border that signals genuine plant knowledge and genuine design intention to everyone who sees it. The caution. Sanguisorba prefers consistently moist soil and performs best in garden positions with reliable moisture through the growing season. In dry conditions, the foliage can scorch and the stem production slows. In reliably moist borders, beside water features, or in garden positions with naturally high soil moisture, it performs with extraordinary vigor and extraordinary continuous flower production that makes it one of the most rewarding and most show-stopping of all the rare perpetual perennials on today's list. Plant number 10, Diascia barbarea. Twin spur and rounding out our rare perpetual blooming perennial list, at number 10 is the plant that closes today's list with the most delicate, the most cottage garden beautiful, and the most quietly continuous small-scale bloom of any trailing or low-growing perennial available. Diascia barbarea, twin spur. From late spring through the first hard frost, Diascia produces a near-continuous succession of those small, spurred, perfectly formed flowers in warm, coral pink, soft rose, salmon, or pale white on slender branching stems that cover the plant in a display of fine-textured, continuously refreshed color that is simultaneously modest in scale and collectively magnificent in its sustained abundance. No other low-growing perennial on today's list, or in the broader perennial palette, produces its particular combination of delicacy, warmth of color, and genuine, unbroken, season-long flowering continuity in quite the same way. The perpetual blooming quality of Diascia is rooted in its natural growth rhythm, which produces flowers in rapid, overlapping succession rather than in concentrated flushes separated by rest periods. Individual flower stems complete their bloom cycle and are replaced by fresh ones emerging from the same branching stem base in a continuous cycle that maintains the overall display at consistent density through every week of the growing season. The warm coral pink of the most popular varieties, a color that is simultaneously distinctive and deeply flattering to every border composition it appears in, is present from late May through October in this unbroken succession, making Diascia one of the most color-reliably continuous perennials available, regardless of how rare and how underutilized it remains in the average garden. The key benefit: the most delicate, the most cottage beautiful, the most warm coral continuously flowering rare perennial on today's list. Diascia closes the list as the plant that most elegantly and most quietly demonstrates the central truth of today's entire video: that perpetual bloom does not require spectacle or boldness or size. It requires only the right plant, chosen for the right reasons, placed in the right position, and then simply allowed to do what it was built to do from the first warm week of late spring to the final day before frost. The caution. Diacia is more heat-sensitive than most plants on today's list and may slow its bloom cycle briefly in the most intense midsummer heat in the hottest climates. A light trim and consistent moisture through August encourages a strong recovery flush as temperatures moderate into September, restoring the full continuous flowering performance for the final and often most beautiful weeks of the garden season. And there you have it, the secret to perpetual blooms, 10 rare perennials that never stop flowering. Geranium Roseanne for the most universally admired, the most constitutionally continuous, and the most effortlessly perpetual violet blue bloom from late spring to frost. 10 rare perennials. One garden that never stops. A border that is as colorful and as full of bloom in October as it was in June. Not because of constant work and constant intervention, but because the plants in it were chosen with the knowledge of what perpetual truly means. Thank you so much for watching. We are genuinely grateful you are here. If today's video revealed plants you had never heard of, that you are already planning to find and grow, please hit that thumbs up right now. It helps this channel reach more gardeners who are ready to discover what the best borders are actually planted with. And if you are not yet subscribed, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a video. We will see you in the very next video. Until then, plant rare, bloom perpetually, and as always, happy gardening.